It was supposed to be a routine royal broadcast celebrating a national charity milestone. Then, in front of rolling cameras and a stunned global audience, Queen Camilla stepped forward and delivered the unthinkable, a public, on-air apology to the Princess of Wales, Catherine. The words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. No script leak had prepared anyone. No palace briefing had hinted at it. Why did Camilla have to apologize live, unscripted and visibly shaken? What hidden offense was so explosive that the Queen Consort was forced to humble herself on national television? This wasn't protocol. This was survival. And the monarchy will never recover from what happened next. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The moment arrived without warning. Camilla's voice cracked on live television as she spoke the words no one expected to hear. "I am truly sorry, Catherine." The sentence hung there, raw and trembling, her usual poise fracturing in real time. Millions watched the split-screen feed where Catherine's face filled the other half shock, flashing across her features, before she forced a mask of controlled composure that barely hid the deep hurt still burning in her eyes. In the palace control room, chaos erupted instantly. Aides gestured frantically off-camera, faces pale, phones pressed to ears, desperately trying to signal for a cut that never came. The apology had been unleashed without rehearsal, without mercy, and the entire broadcast team knew they were witnessing history unraveling before their eyes. This single moment stemmed from a private confrontation that had been building for months in the shadows of palace corridors. Senior courtiers had demanded the public act of contrition to prevent a far worse scandal from exploding into the open one that could have torn the royal image apart beyond repair. Camilla stood there torn between pride that had carried her through decades of waiting, guilt that now clawed at her chest, and the desperate need to protect the institution she had fought so hard to join. Every word cost her something vital, yet she delivered them because the alternative was unthinkable. The carefully maintained facade of unity the monarchy had guarded for generations shattered in real time on live television, leaving viewers around the world gasping at the raw vulnerability of a queen forced to her knees. But even as the apology ended and the cameras faded to black, Camilla leaned slightly away from the microphone and whispered one single sentence that insiders say changed everything. But to understand why a queen would be forced to apologize to the future queen on live television, we must go back to the private war that had been raging behind palace doors for far longer than anyone realized. While the public saw polite smiles and coordinated appearances, a cold war had been quietly raging between Queen Camilla and Catherine for years. Petty slights turned into power struggles, whispered briefings became outright sabotage, and what began as rivalry over influence grew into something far more dangerous. Insiders now reveal the exact incidents that pushed tensions to breaking point, and why Camilla's live apology was the only way to stop the monarchy from imploding. The truth is uglier and more personal than the palace ever wanted you to know. The friction started small, almost invisible to outsiders. At family events, Camilla would arrange seating, so Catherine found herself at the far end of the table, a subtle exclusion that stung more than any overt snub. Leaked stories soon followed carefully placed items in certain newspapers, painting Catherine as distant, demanding, or overly ambitious, each one chipping away at the warm, relatable image she had so carefully built. Catherine felt the cuts but said nothing, choosing quiet grace while the resentment simmered beneath her composure. Camilla, meanwhile, watched Catherine's popularity soar with every public appearance, every natural smile, every effortless connection with crowds that once belonged to her. The threat was real and growing. The woman who had waited decades to claim her place now saw the spotlight shifting permanently to the next generation. Private dinners became battlegrounds disguised as polite gatherings. Behind the crystal and candlelight, sharp words flew in hushed tones. Camilla would make a casual remark about tradition needing to be preserved. Catherine would counter softly but firmly that the monarchy must evolve or risk irrelevance. Those exchanges left the room colder each time, smiles never quite reaching the eyes. Insiders later described the atmosphere as suffocating, two women locked in a silent contest neither could openly admit. Camilla felt the poison of insecurity spread through her veins every time Catherine's name trended for the right reasons, while her own mentions grew fewer and more critical. The real escalation came when Catherine allegedly discovered Camilla had quietly blocked several of her independent initiatives. Patronages she had championed were redirected or delayed, funding quietly rerouted, invitations mysteriously lost. The betrayal cut deep because it was personal. Camilla had not just disagreed, she had acted to limit Catherine's reach. The generational clash fueled everything, the old guard clinging to control versus the modern royal determined to carve her own path. Jealousy and insecurity burned at the heart of it. Camilla had endured public vilification for years to stand beside Charles. Now she watched the younger woman receive adoration without the same price. The inner turmoil tore at her pride, warring with the fear that her long-awaited queenship was already slipping away, overshadowed by someone who had not waited, who simply shone. Those private battles stayed hidden until one single incident pushed everything into the open and forced Camilla to make the most humiliating choice of her life. It happened behind closed doors at a private family gathering. One comment, one gesture, one unforgivable breach of trust. What Catherine discovered that night shattered any remaining pretense of civility between her and Camilla. Insiders described the exact words exchanged and the stunned silence that followed. The fallout was so severe that senior royals realized only one thing could contain the damage: a public apology from the Queen herself on live television. This is the moment the private war became impossible to hide. The confrontation unfolded in a quiet drawing room after dinner, the kind of evening meant for light conversation and family unity. Catherine had just learned the truth about the blocked initiatives, the quiet sabotage that had undermined her work for months. She spoke first, voice low but steady, her quiet fury cutting through the air like a blade. "How could you?" The words landed heavy. Camilla's defensive retort came fast, sharp and unyielding. "I did what was necessary to protect the crown you seem so eager to change." The room froze. No one moved. Charles sat between them, his face pale, caught in the middle as the two women he loved most turned on each other with years of buried resentment finally spilling out. Catherine's eyes filled with the raw realization of betrayal after years of quiet endurance, the depth of it hitting her like a physical blow. She had trusted, she had waited, she had smiled through every subtle slight. And now the woman who should have been an ally had been working against her all along. The tension rose with every heartbeat. Camilla's pride refused to bend, yet the fear in her eyes betrayed her. She knew Catherine held evidence that could destroy reputations if released. Charles begged them both to keep it contained, his voice cracking as he pleaded for silence, for the sake of the family, for the sake of the institution they all served. The secret pressures weighed on everyone in that room. One wrong word, and the carefully built brand of royal unity would collapse under the weight of public scandal. Catherine stood her ground, the modern royal refusing to yield, while Camilla clung to the old guard's ways, her insecurity and jealousy now laid bare. The layered context was devastating. This single incident did not just wound two women, it threatened the entire monarchy's image of harmony, the very foundation the public had been sold for decades. The argument did not end with shouting. It ended with a chilling silence that promised consequences. Catherine turned away first, the betrayal etched into every line of her face, while Camilla sat motionless, realizing the cost of her actions had finally caught up with her. No one slept that night. The family hovered on the brink of open rupture, and senior courtiers knew desperate action was required. With the family on the brink of open rupture, senior courtiers made a desperate calculation, and Camilla was given no choice but to agree to the most public humiliation imaginable. In a locked palace room at 2 a.m., Senior royals delivered the ultimatum to Queen Camilla: apologize publicly, on live television, or risk Catherine releasing evidence that could destroy reputations and destabilize the succession. No negotiation. No delay. Camilla sat in stunned silence, while the people she trusted most told her she had to humble herself before the nation. This wasn't about forgiveness. It was about survival. The decision that followed would haunt her forever. The summit began the moment the heavy doors sealed shut. Senior courtiers spoke first, voices low and urgent, laying out the timeline with brutal clarity. Catherine had proof documents, messages, witness accounts that Camilla had interfered with her initiatives. If those surfaced, the damage would be catastrophic, far beyond a single scandal. Arguments erupted almost immediately. One advisor pushed hard for containment through silence, but another countered that silence would look like guilt. Tears came next, not from Camilla at first, but from Charles, who sat hunched forward, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles turned white. He begged for another way, his voice breaking as he pleaded with everyone to find a path that spared his wife this humiliation. Camilla listened without speaking, her face a mask of controlled fury, while pride and terror warred inside her. She had waited decades for this crown. Now the same institution demanded she bow before the woman she had quietly resented for years. The secret leverage Catherine held was never named aloud, yet its shadow filled the room. Documents that could prove deliberate blocking of patronages, quiet briefings against Catherine's projects, enough to paint Camilla as the architect of sabotage rather than a supportive queen. The courtiers presented it plainly: release the apology or watch the evidence leak in fragments, each one more damaging than the last. Camilla's pride flared. She had endured worse, she argued, public scorn, years of being the outsider. But fear won, losing everything she had fought for, watching the succession wobble, seeing Charles suffer under the weight of divided loyalty that terrified her more than any public moment. Charles' inner conflict tore him apart, torn between the wife he loved and the daughter-in-law who represented the future he had promised the nation. He could not choose. The decision had to be hers. The apology was scripted in frantic minutes on a single sheet of paper passed hand to hand. Every line weighed for maximum visibility and minimum exposure, no admissions of specific wrongdoing, only vague regret and a call for unity. The language was careful, designed to minimize damage while forcing Camilla into the most public act of contrition possible. She read it once in silence, then again aloud, her voice steady, but hollow. When the final version lay finished, she nodded once, a small, decisive motion that felt like surrender. Tears did not fall then. They would come later, in private. The room exhaled as one, relief mixed with dread. They knew this broadcast would change the monarchy's public face forever, stripping away the last illusion of unbreakable harmony. The script was written, the cameras were positioned, and Camilla walked onto the set knowing the next few minutes would redefine her legacy, but no one expected what she would actually say when the red light came on. The broadcast began as a routine charity segment. Then Camilla stepped forward, voice trembling, and spoke directly to Catherine on live television. "I am deeply sorry for the pain I have caused you." The nation froze. Social media erupted. Catherine watched from another room, expression unreadable. What followed was not a rehearsed platitude, it was raw, unscripted emotion that revealed far more than the palace intended. This was the moment the monarchy's mask finally cracked open. Camilla's delivery broke frame by frame in agonizing slow motion. Her voice cracked on the word sorry, a jagged fracture that no script could have prepared for. The next breath caught in her throat, forcing a pause that stretched across millions of screens. Tears she could not hide welled and spilled, glistening under the studio lights as her hands gripped the lectern until her knuckles turned white. Every syllable carried the weight of decades of ambition colliding with sudden surrender. The Queen, who had once stood defiant, now reduced to trembling vulnerability in front of the world. The agony was unmistakable, raw and unrelenting, as if each word cost her another piece of the pride she had fought so hard to claim. Across the split screen, Catherine remained perfectly still. Her face held controlled grace, the kind drilled into her since childhood, yet beneath it deep hurt flickered in her eyes like a shadow she refused to let surface. She did not smile. She did not nod. She simply listened, the silence from her side speaking volumes louder than any acceptance could have. That quiet composure became its own statement, a masterclass in dignity that made Camilla's tears feel even heavier by contrast. In living rooms across the country, gasps rippled through families gathered around televisions. Phones lit up instantly as clips went viral, hashtags exploding within seconds while commentators scrambled to react live. The public felt the shock in real time, hearts racing with the realization that they were witnessing something historic and deeply human. Sympathy shifted overnight, pouring toward Catherine in waves of support that no palace statement could redirect. The moment stripped away layers of protocol and revealed the cost of survival measured in public humiliation. A queen forced to bow so the crown could endure. Yet the most powerful part was unplanned. In the final seconds, Camilla added an ad-lib no one had scripted, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I hope one day we can stand together again." That single line carried raw authenticity, turning a forced apology into something that felt painfully real and left viewers breathless with its unintended honesty. The apology aired, the broadcast ended. But the real fallout was only beginning because Catherine's response would prove far more powerful than any words Camilla could speak. After Camilla's live apology, the world waited for Catherine's response. It never came. Instead, she chose silence, a silence so loud it drowned out every headline. No statement, no forgiveness granted publicly, just quiet dignity that turned the narrative completely. Insiders reveal why Catherine refused to accept the apology on air and how her restraint became the most devastating power move of all. The Princess of Wales had just rewritten the rules of royal survival. In the hours after the broadcast, Catherine retreated to a private room far from prying eyes. Her private reaction was a storm held perfectly in check-controlled fury, flashing behind her eyes, while strategic calm settled over every movement. She did not cry. She did not pace. She sat still, breathing slowly, processing the betrayal that had been laid bare on national television. The apology had been forced, yes, but it had also been incomplete, lacking the specificity or sincerity she needed to heal the wound. Refusing to accept it publicly was not spite, it was self-preservation. Any word from her would have been dissected, twisted, used to either absolve Camilla or fuel more speculation. Silence gave her control. Silence let the apology stand alone, exposed and unanswered, forcing the world to judge its worth without her endorsement. Secret meetings followed within the day. Trusted aides gathered in a secure wing while Catherine listened more than she spoke. They presented options, carefully worded statements of gracious forgiveness, joint appearances to signal unity, even a private call that could be leaked as reconciliation. She rejected them all. Her voice stayed even when she explained. Any response would shift the focus back to Camilla's tears, rather than the actions that caused them. Silence, she said, was her strongest weapon. It allowed public sympathy to flow toward her naturally. Unforced. Unstoppable. Within hours, the narrative had flipped. Social media flooded with support for Catherine, hashtags praising her dignity, commentators calling the apology insufficient. The contrast sharpened brutally, Camilla's forced vulnerability on one side, Catherine's unshakable composure on the other. One woman had been made to bow, the other refused to bend. That restraint carried devastating power. Global sympathy shifted overnight, pouring toward the Princess of Wales in waves that no palace press office could redirect. Camilla's public role began to shrink in subtle but unmistakable ways, fewer solo engagements, more joint appearances where Catherine's presence dominated without effort. Insiders whispered that Camilla's influence, once quietly formidable, now felt diminished, overshadowed by a future queen who had proven she could command the narrative without saying a word. Yet one private message allegedly passed between them afterward, a single line sent from Catherine to Camilla that insiders say carried more weight than any public statement ever could. Catherine's silence sent shockwaves through the palace, but the monarchy's real test came in the weeks that followed when the public demanded to know whether forgiveness was possible or whether the rift was permanent. The live apology was over, but the real question remained. Would Catherine ever truly forgive Camilla? Public appearances were tense, private meetings strained, and the palace worked overtime to project unity while everyone waited for the next crack. Insiders reveal the behind-the-scenes efforts to heal the wound, and why some senior royals fear the damage may be irreversible. The monarchy now hangs on whether two women can find peace, or whether the fracture will widen forever. The weeks that followed felt like walking on glass. Joint appearances were arranged with surgical precision, smiles fixed in place, hands occasionally brushing in choreographed unity, but the tension underneath was electric. Catherine's posture stayed regal, her voice warm for the cameras, yet her eyes carried a quiet distance that no amount of staging could hide. Camilla moved beside her with careful grace, every gesture measured to show humility, but the forced smiles never quite reached her heart. The public saw harmony, insiders felt the strain. Behind closed doors, private meetings stretched late into the night, advisors urging forgiveness, letters drafted and torn up, small olive branches extended only to be met with polite but firm silence. The family watched, hearts heavy, as William stood between two women he loved, his own relationship with his father growing heavier with every strained conversation. Charles, caught in the middle, aged visibly in those weeks, torn between defending his wife and supporting the daughter-in-law who represented the future he had promised the nation. Two paths now stretched ahead, each more suspenseful than the last. One led toward reconciliation, quiet dinners, shared causes, a slow thawing that could heal the visible rift and restore the monarchy's image of unbreakable strength. The other pointed toward permanent distance, polite nods in public and cold separation in private, a fracture that might never close. Senior royals feared the second path most, whispering that the damage ran too deep, that trust once broken in such a public way could never fully return. The layered context weighed on everyone. This was no ordinary family quarrel. It touched William's loyalty to both his father and his wife, Charles' desperate need to hold the family together, and the entire institution's fragile balance of power. Every decision rippled outward, affecting schedules, public roles, even the tone of future engagements. Major changes were already unfolding for Camilla. Her public calendar quietly thinned, fewer solo appearances, more shared events where Catherine's presence dominated naturally. Her influence, once felt in subtle ways, now seemed diminished, as if the live apology had redrawn the lines of authority inside the palace walls. Catherine, meanwhile, carried the weight of duty versus self-respect in every quiet moment. She knew forgiveness was expected, demanded even, for the sake of the crown she would one day wear, yet the betrayal still burned, and yielding too easily felt like surrendering the dignity she had fought to protect. That inner conflict left her torn between the role she was born for and the woman she refused to let be diminished. The entire family stood caught between healing and self-preservation, hearts aching with the knowledge that one wrong step could widen the crack into something permanent. Children watched adults navigate pain they could not name, while the older generation wondered if the monarchy they had inherited could survive the honesty it now faced. As the palace tries to rebuild, one final question looms over everything. Can the monarchy survive when even its queens must publicly bow to save it? One live apology. One moment of public humiliation. The huge rift between Queen Camilla and Catherine has forced the entire royal family to confront a brutal truth. Even the highest ranks are not immune to pain, pride, and power struggles. Will this crisis forge a stronger, more honest monarchy, or will it plant the seeds of its slow unraveling? The choices made in the coming months will decide everything. This isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of a reckoning the crown never saw coming. The long-term shifts settle slowly, but irreversibly over the palace like winter frost. Royal dynamics that once moved with predictable grace now carry an undercurrent of caution, every glance between family members weighed, every joint appearance analysed for signs of warmth or distance. William navigates the tightrope with quiet determination, his loyalty to both father and wife stretched thinner than ever before. Charles grows quieter in public, the man who spent a lifetime waiting for the throne, now spending sleepless nights wondering if he has preserved it or merely delayed its fracture. Catherine emerges steadier, her public voice carrying new authority, yet the private cost shows in moments when her composure slips for just a heartbeat. Camilla retreats slightly from the spotlight, her once confident stride tempered by the memory of that trembling broadcast, her influence reshaped by a single act of forced humility. Two futures now hover in tense suspense. One path leads to genuine reconciliation, late-night conversations that finally bridge the silence, shared causes that rebuild trust brick by brick, a family choosing healing over pride. The other points toward permanent Cold War polite nods at events, separate schedules, a rift that widens with every unspoken word until it becomes the new normal. Global reaction surges and fractures in waves. Younger audiences rally behind Catherine's dignity, seeing her silence as strength and her restraint as proof the monarchy can evolve. Traditionalists mourn the loss of mystique, warning that too much openness invites collapse. Public opinion splits and reforms. Petitions rise calling for transparency, while others defend the old veil of unity. Every poll, every viral moment, every whispered conversation becomes a referendum on whether the crown can survive authenticity or must cling to illusion. At its deepest layer, this crisis stands as the monarchy's last, desperate chance to modernize or face irrelevance. Centuries of tradition clash head-on with a world that demands honesty, vulnerability, and accountability. The institution that weathered wars and abdications now faces something quieter, but no less lethal. The slow erosion of public faith, when even queens must publicly bow to preserve power. The coming months will reveal whether the crown bends toward a more human future or doubles down on control at the cost of its soul. Whatever Catherine decides next carries the weight of destiny. One choice could heal the family quiet forgiveness, offered in private that ripples outward, restoring fragile unity and proving love and duty can coexist. The other could break it beyond repair, continued distance that hardens into precedent, signaling that even the highest ranks cannot escape ordinary human fracture. The answer will echo far beyond palace walls, deciding whether the monarchy enters a new chapter of resilience or begins its slow, heartbreaking decline. Behind every crown, every title, every carefully scripted moment, lies the human cost that no protocol can erase. Camilla will carry the memory of her trembling voice and the silence that answered it. Catherine will bear the scars of betrayal and the burden of choosing between self-respect and sacrifice. Charles and William will live with the ache of divided loyalties, forever marked by the night the family stood on the edge of ruin. These are not distant figures in history, they are people who loved, who hurt, who fought to hold everything together, and who now face the truth that some things cannot be mended with words alone. The pain they endure will outlast every headline, a silent testament to the price of power when even queens must kneel. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.